Hello, I'm Billy Himpler with GovCon Leaders Circle. Welcome to Insight Interviews. Today I'm joined by Tanecia Canady. Hi, Tanecia, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great, Billy. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Are you ready for your Insight interview?
I am. Yes.
Great. Well, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Senior Vice President of Finance at OneZero Solutions. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. I came in during a period of significant growth and operational maturity. My career has largely been in the government contracting space. I started out in public accounting where I was doing financial statement audits for government contractors, and that really gave me a really strong foundation in the industry. So from there, I transitioned into private industry where I began to really expand on that experience to helping organizations navigate complexity and really scale in a thoughtful and compliant way.
Excellent.
I've been in the DC area since I was a senior in high school,
Yeah.
actually from Georgia, a small town called Vidalia.
Oh, okay. All right. Good. And then where'd you go to school?
I went to George Mason University.
Okay. Yeah. So and then you stuck around.
I went to George Mason. From there, I actually moved to the Richmond area because I started out in my public accounting career with what was then McGladrey and Pullen and back up to Tyson's, where I started working with that team. And that's where I really got embedded in the government contracting world.
Got it. And before we get into a little bit more about OneZero, so you're the VP of Finance,
Yep,
effectively the CFO. There is no CFO.
correct. Yep.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit more about one.
Sure. OneZero Solutions was founded in 2017 by our CEO, Al Sowers. Our focus is really on IT and cybersecurity services. We support both civilian and defense agencies across the federal government, and we support agencies such as Department of State, DHS, DIA, and National Guard Bureau. One of the things that really differentiates OneZero from other small and mid-sized IT firms is really our breadth of cyber and IT capabilities across the full mission lifecycle. So I think many similarly situated companies in the federal space, they tend to specialize maybe in one area, whether that's cybersecurity compliance, enterprise infrastructure, or application development. And our teams really operate across all three. So that allows us to support the agencies not just in securing the systems, but in designing, operating, modernizing in those environments that they run in. That full spectrum capability allows us to bring a much more integrated approach to our clients. And I think they really value that because they themselves are in very highly regulated and mission critical environments.
Excellent. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. Bring it back to you for a moment. And I do have more questions about OneZero. So, day to day, you're managing accounting and finance. What are the other areas you're managing, overseeing?
My main oversight is really over accounting and finance, but I think from that, it kind of breaks out into, pricing governance. We provide obviously, the indirect rate structures that pricing is using. Again, we monitor to make sure our pricing is both competitive as well as, sustaining the financial health of the firm. We touch operations. So we're helping to ensure the programs are financially running in a stable manner and also touching contracts, making sure that contracts has what they need in terms of pushing out subcontractor rates, things such as that. So again, I'm mainly over finance in this particular role, but because my other roles have been such breadth across the organization, I have a lot of experience in making sure, finance is able to add value throughout the rest of the firm.
Excellent. Okay. And so you're reporting to Al directly,
Correct.
and you are still wearing many hats. It's funny if you're talking to a CFO of a $10 billion firm versus a CFO at a $10 million firm, very different experiences. Do you like having the influence, the impact? Does it stress you out at times having so many hats?
I enjoy it. I think for me, I've always liked to understand how the business runs holistically. Like I said, I started out my career in public accounting and I focused on government contracts from an audit perspective. I think that really gave me a good understanding and a foundation for how they operate, as well as internal controls and compliance that's necessary. I think for me, throughout my career, I've always been very interested in, again, how everything connects throughout
The
the
entire machine.
organization, throughout the whole
Yeah.
thing. I've
Sense.
I've been in larger GovCons, and I've been, obviously, the sweet spot is those small and mid-size. What I've learned in being in the different size firms is a lot of the problems are the same, right? I
Yeah.
think if your leadership team is aligned and you all understand how everything works, you understand that the growth is not just in the winning work, it's really in having the infrastructure, the processes, and the leadership alignment that's going to sustain that. I've always been very interested in building things and learning how to scale. I love wearing the different hats. Does it get stressful? I think
Sort
in
of a
any,
loaded question.
it can be stressful, but I think
Yeah.
for me personally, it's extremely rewarding. It's extremely rewarding. You know, I value being able to contribute not only to the organization's growth, but also, my fellow teammates. For me, kind of being able to add any level of value to those functions outside of myself is rewarding, even though, yeah, sometimes it is stressful when you're building the plane while you're also flying it, right? The outcome is always very rewarding.
Can you give us a sense of size where you guys maybe were when you started and where you are today?
Sure. When I started with OneZero, we were about 25 million and we're about 40 million today.
It's great.
So we're continuing to grow and, like I said, expand out our capabilities, our contract vehicles, our partnerships. We definitely are on the right trajectory.
All right, so you've been dual hatted in many roles in the past. We touched on it a little bit, but give us a little bit of your backstory prior to 1 0. You and I met years ago at
Mm,
Savan. How'd you get here?
sure. I give a lot of credit to, my experience in public accounting. Again, I started out as an auditor doing that. So again, I give a lot of credit to that foundation because you not only learn the accounting, you're learning the systems and internal controls and things like that. So when I left public accounting, I transitioned into my first private company, which was a defense government contractor. And when I first went to that company, they were at about $18 million, and within 2 years, they grew to about $160 million. They won a really large contract to build an airship, and being part of that growth was really a incredible learning experience because I was really able to see how rapidly an organization can and probably has to scale when the demand, the contracts, and the revenue are there and in place. So, unfortunately, I also saw the other side of that story because when our customer canceled that contract, the company wasn't able to recover. So, we had to wind down very quickly. And over time, the organization went from hundreds of employees down to essentially 2 people, and one of them was me. That experience just really gave me a very unique perspective because I saw, again, both the upside as well as the downside of rapid growth. And during that wind down phase, when we talk about wearing multiple hats, that's where I really became involved in virtually every function of the company: legal, IT, contracts,
Yeah,
HR, operations, and of course, finance and accounting. But that was something because, there were so few people left to
right.
manage the business. So I think what I took away from that experience again is just how interconnected everything is. Um, and how important infrastructure and leadership alignment is. So when I later transitioned to Savan, I was really able to use a lot of those lessons learned to help that company really think more intentionally and strategically about how we were staffing, how we were building internal processes and systems, and really how to avoid those silos that I think can create challenges as you're trying to grow. I think that those experiences really shape how I approach work today because as organizations grow, there's a real need to introduce operational discipline without slowing down innovation. So I'm very focused on building systems, creating mentoring teams, improving processes, and really helping leadership translate their strategy into financial outcomes. I also use AI. That's been a great tool. I've been using it in quite some time to create efficiency and allow the company to grow while still controlling cost. And I think for me, given all those experiences and wearing all those different hats, I've become very passionate about creating the kind of structure that's going to allow the company to continue to grow and scale and remain financially healthy.
That's great. That's great. A couple things you talked about a moment ago. So, not every CFO is involved in pricing. To what degree are you involved in pricing? Because that starts to bleed into sort of the front end of the business, going after work, which is not typically a back office traditional role. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Historically, I've been the pricer. Working in small firms, um, again, a lot of functions bleed into each other because, I was responsible for managing and creating the company's indirect rates, having relationships with ECAA, ensuring margin health for the firm as well. A lot of that just bled into pricing. So I was able to dual function and help with that as well. So historically, pricing had lived in finance, and because at certain times we were so small, I was doing the pricing, I was building the cost models, I was doing the cost narratives, the compliance checks, the team reviews, the subcontractor relations, and things like that. I think as companies grow and as OneZero is growing, to your point, we realized that the value in having that function, live in a more business development driven part of the firm, and then just allowing finance to come in and really drive the compliance, help evaluate the price to win, help with those type of things. So I think to your point, as a CFO, historically I've been in the pricing, but given kind of where we're going now with OneZero and being able to structure differently, I think the real value in my role is coming in at that higher level and really helping the BD team and the operations team understand the bigger picture of what that project or opportunity would look like financially upon award.
Yeah, well, and it's so cliche, but trying to boil the ocean on your own, you're not going to scale. So find it. You have to have a dedicated resource, play to your
Yeah,
strengths. You mentioned operational discipline or operational excellence. Yeah, I mean it's as simple as that. Uh, you got to have lanes at some point. You don't want to get
definitely.
overly siloed. You don't want to get too flat, and you've got one person doing everything. Great,
Definitely.
awesome. So there's a lot going on in the industry right now. What's OneZero doing? What are you seeing? What do you think the challenges are that are right in front of us and maybe some that are coming up?
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now in the small business government contracting space really relates to the increased scrutiny and evolving expectations around the 8A program. The program has historically been a very important pathway for small and disadvantaged businesses to enter the market, but over the last few years and definitely over the last few months, we've seen regulatory bodies really taking a closer look at how those contracts are procured, structured, and even executed. So, I think for companies operating in this space, it's creating an environment where you have to think much more intentionally about long-term positioning. And not that you didn't need to do that before, right? There was always the cliff, but for some firms, it probably feels like that runway could be actually shortened. So many firms that initially grew through set aside opportunities are now focusing on really strengthening those technical capabilities through strategic partnerships and even non-organic growth transactions such as opportunities. But I think that kind of capability expansion can really help companies move beyond the traditional small business opportunities and really compete more effectively in the broader market. At OneZero, we are an 8A firm, so we've taken a very deliberate approach to that transition. So we do still continue to leverage small business opportunities, but we're also investing very heavily in the capabilities and the infrastructure that are going to allow us to compete more broadly. And that includes strengthening our cyber and IT service offerings, expanding our partnership relationships, and again, really building the internal systems that are going to be necessary to support those larger and more complex programs. So ultimately, I think companies that are going to succeed in this environment right now under the 8A program are really ones that treat the small business programs just as sort of a launching point rather than a long-term strategy, and
Mhm.
really shifting that focus onto building those capabilities that are going to stand on their own in a competitive market.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it does feel like that's been the biggest long-term impact out of all of the sea of changes in the last 12 to 18 months. Doge, government shutdown, focus on OTAs, the 8A program. I mean, that's going back years. I feel like that was a great way for new businesses to get going and really sustain for many years. And we'll see what happens beyond maybe the majority of 8As. We've got the Alaska Natives, Hawaiian Natives, tribal natives, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space as well.
You know, I think if I had to point to a couple of things that have shaped both my career and really just me personally, I think the biggest one would probably be ownership and accountability. No matter what role I've been in, I've always approached my work as if the outcome was my responsibility. And I think when you take that mindset, you naturally start thinking about solutions instead of just identifying or absorbing problems or challenges. And I think you naturally evolve into a growth mindset. Early in my career, I realized the fastest way to grow was to again understand how the business was working, not just focusing on my own functional area. And that meant asking a lot of questions, sitting and really paying attention in meetings, learning from people outside of my functional area, whether it was contracts, HR, ops, BD, but really understanding how everything
Meshes, yeah.
and, and being able to use data a lot. I think, as an accountant, as someone who works with numbers, um, I rely heavily on data and facts when I'm making decisions. And I think, you know, over my career span, I believe that's really built a lot of trust. I think when people know that your perspective and your recommendations are actually grounded in real information and analysis, it creates credibility and alignment. So I think, you know, for anyone, going the extra mile, getting the data, being able to present it in a way that people understand is very, very important, even if you're not a numbers person. And so that's worked well for me. And I think, you know, as an accountant, sometimes you can start being, very right or wrong, black or white. And I've learned as I've grown in my career into, executive spaces that it's important to be disciplined, but also be flexible at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Because in government contracting and accounting, yes, it's a very highly regulated environment. And there are rights and wrongs. And you have to understand what those are, right? Because compliance and structure definitely matter. But the reality it is business problems are very rarely black and white. So you really have to still be able to interpret the data, but understand the impact and still be able to find a practical solution that, meets everyone's needs and still moves the organization forward. So I think that's been one big thing that I've learned and leaned on um, throughout my career. And one suggestion I have for other people as they're moving up as well. I think that served me well. And then just staying humble but relentless about solving problems and helping the organization succeed. Again, relentless in finding the solution, but again, humble enough to stay grounded in facts and data and even collaborate. I'm very collaborative. I never work in a silo. I value other people's opinions and expertise, and that's lent itself very well for me in terms of being able to solve problems that create positive change throughout the organization.
A few nuggets, just collecting from what you shared there. So the oxymoron I think of is like patiently aggressive, or aggressively patient, whichever way you want to look at it. Yeah, the humility aspect, but you're secretly working. It's the iceberg, you're secretly working under the radar, waiting for your opportunity. I think if I may be so bold to kind of condense a lot of that, it sounds like, and you are, that indispensable agent, making yourself impossible to be without from the company's perspective. That's great. That's what the company wants. That's what you want.
Like,
And then I was thinking as you're talking about, the black and white. We're both accountants. I'm not anymore, but the memes of accounting versus sales.
yeah,
The accounting team always has it black and white, and the sales team is like, what can we get away with?
yes.
It's a little bit different in the GovCon space. Finance is an instrumental part. You got program finance, pricing. So it's a little bit different than just say, commercial accounting. But yeah, it's always an interesting relationship between back office and front office.
And it's interesting you use that term indispensable
Yeah.
because a lot of that as you grow in your career, you learn is not just the technical piece, right? But the interpersonal and the emotional intelligence that also is very valued in the firm. And, again, going back to things being black and white and being flexible, I think a lot of that also lends itself to, understanding the culture of the firm around you and being able to blend into that culture as well while remaining having your integrity around the work that you're doing, but being someone that people like going to solve problems with and things like that. I think that's also very important and sometimes something that's missed when you talk about success in a corporate structure.
Yeah. No, I mean, if it's sometimes leaders are picked, they don't stand up on their own. If everyone's going to you, you kind of already are a leader by default. Yeah, great. Well, I think the foundation you had with RSM. You lasted a lot longer than I did. I don't know if you remember. I did work there for a year.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, yeah, but I mean, great place to start. I think a lot of people in accounting and finance, mainly accounting, they're looking at right coming out of college. Where do I start? Public accounting is a great foundation.
Yes.
Helps you build that dynamic exposure, discipline.
Yes. Few things I got from public accounting are is the relentless reconciliations, right?
Mm,
Finding the answer. If something's not the outcome is not what you expect or it's not tying out, going the extra mile,
yeah,
right, to figure it out and document it and things like that. And this is before I knew anything about the different regulations around or knew a lot of depth around the regulations around SBA, DCA, and things like that. But
yeah,
that role was really developing me to go into those compliance areas very smoothly. I
instrumental. Yeah,
knew yeah, I knew how important it was to document SOPs. I knew how important it was to maintain supporting documentation and do accounting memos, and I knew how important that was, and I valued that. So, like I said, I give so much credit to my time at RSM because it was
yeah,
such a building block to get to where I am now.
right, right. No, I mean, folks coming out of college, it's an amazing opportunity to
Yeah,
start in
it is.
public for a variety of reasons. That's how I ended up in recruiting,
Yeah,
where you learn so much, and not just necessarily public accounting, but similar large consulting firms. It's a great place to start, build, and then from there you're off to the races. Well,
agreed.
great. What's one thing you'd really like to see in the industry or would like to learn more about and explore?
I think one thing I'd really like to see continuing to evolve in the industry is how agencies are evaluating value when they're acquiring services. I think it's getting better, but I still think in a lot of cases, the government's focus still leans heavily towards price,
Mhm.
particularly for labor based contracts. But as we know, some of the most impactful solutions come from contractors that are able to bring in that deeper technical experience and those integrated capabilities, right? And a lot of times those are not cheap things to bring in or lower cost things to bring in. So I think there's still a real opportunity for acquisition strategies to continue to evolve in the ways that are really prioritizing the outcome of the mission, and really the long term value and not just short term cost savings. So I think when agencies are really creating a space for that innovation and that technical depth, it really allows companies to bring more thoughtful solutions and ultimately strengthen the performance of the government's mission. So I think if there was one thing I'd really like to see continue to evolve, it would be that marriage between the, value and pricing.
Mm, yeah. It's the old adage, you get what you pay for, right? If you're always going to the bottom, what do you expect? We would all like to see that from the government. We would all like to see the government running, like Apple or Google
Yeah.
in a different way, but yeah, that's great. All right. Well, any other closing thoughts or anything else you want to share about OneZero, yourself, or the industry?
I think even with everything going on, it's still a great time to be in the industry. I think innovation still very much exists and there's definitely still a demand for it. And, I'm still very excited, because I think the work we do really matters. It still matters, for us personally, the systems that we build and, protect, they are supporting real missions and they're supporting real people across the government. So I think that keeps me excited, even with some of the disruption that's happening, So for me personally, I've always been very drawn to organizations that are building and innovating and evolving, and OneZero is definitely very much in that phase. So, as we continue to grow our capabilities and strengthen our infrastructure and, position ourselves for long-term success, I think this is just again a really exciting time to be in the industry. So, it's been really rewarding to be in particular a part of OneZero's journey. So I'm still very optimistic about where both the company and the industry as a whole are headed.
When you're doing something you love, it's not a
Yeah,
job.
agreed.
The work itself being so fulfilling and gratifying from what you shared, yeah, it makes a difference in your day to day.
Yeah,
If you're just slogging along,
agreed.
it's tough.
Agreed. And, I think, like I said, the innovation, the demand for that is still there. And for me, outside of just working with the numbers and things, I get very excited when I'm in the BD meetings and I'm hearing about these opportunities and I'm hearing about the capabilities that we're, growing or, exploring. So again, I think, yes, there's a lot of disruption and things happening. In our industry, but outside of that, I still think there's really a lot of great opportunities out there as well.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Well, thank you for joining us, Tanecia. And for those
Right.
watching, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, please follow, like, and subscribe. If you or anyone you know is interested in GovCon Leader Circle or doing an insight interview, please reach out. That wraps up this episode. Tune in for our next one. Thank you so much.